Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
In 1999, I was working on SegaNet, or Sega Network, which was the first online games console community and service. And back then, she wasn't just the biggest name in games community, she was the only name in games community. Our next speaker, Amy Jo Kim, she set the baseline and the timber of thought for all games online community going forward. Please help me welcome to the stage, Amy Jo Kim.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, testing, testing. Can you hear me? How many of you, yes, okay. How many of you are currently working on a new project, a new game or product or app? Well, this talk is for you. Thank you for joining me today. If you want to tweet, please use the Getting to Alpha hashtag shown here to tag your posts on Twitter, and I will make a point to address them. I'm going to start with a short introduction, get right into 7 habits that characterize breakthrough innovators. And then I'm going to give you 3 practical shortcuts you could use right away on your projects, those of you doing early product design, to turbocharge your progress. If you're an entrepreneur or an innovator or a maker, you already know that everything starts with a hunch. An exciting idea you want to explore, a hot area you want to pursue, a market opportunity you want to jump on, a vision for something that you're itching to build. But until you've developed, tested, and iterated it, your idea is just a hypothesis. How do you know if today's idea is the right one to pursue? I'm Amy Jo Kim. I specialize in early stage innovation. At ShuffleBrain, we've had the pleasure of working with many great companies and teams, all of them trying to build something innovative and new. Some of them were a lot more successful than others. A handful of our early stage clients have gone on to become genre-defining hits. What set those teams apart? Can we identify habits, beliefs, and behaviors that reliably lead to better, faster innovation? I think we can. And today I'm going to share 7 habits of the teams who've produced breakthrough innovations. These are from my own personal experience. The first habit is foundational. Think like a scientist. This builds on what the last 2 speakers in this room were talking about with the lean startup methodology. Lean startup didn't invent this methodology. I think game designers were doing it long before lean startup came around. But the idea of doing small, high-learning MVP experiments to scope your project, to actually test your most fundamental assumptions, is something I learned from working with the best game designers and the teams who actually produced these breakthrough hits. It's all about moving quickly through the build, measure, learn cycle and maximizing learning when you should be. What you want to do is ask the really hard, important questions up front. I see so many teams get excited about, let's make the onboarding pretty and smooth. That's a lot easier than, for instance, on the Sims team saying, what's actually going to keep people engaged in a virtual dollhouse simulation? We explored that for at least 3 years, in pre-production. That was the hardest question. Now, solving that through iteration and testing led to the highest grossing PC franchise of all time. The early team at eBay, I work on both games and products. The early team at eBay experimented with a wide variety of social systems, many of which I was designing, for building trust among buyers and sellers. Remember, this was the late 90s, back when online shopping was still a niche activity. The core question was, what's it going to take to really build trust? The Rock Band team, when we started working on that project, faced a daunting challenge. Could non-musicians playing plastic instruments make music together and feel like a band? At that time, a lot of people said we were nuts. But answering that question was fundamental. Without a big resounding yes, nothing else mattered. For Covet Fashion, a hit mobile game for fashionistas, the team already knew what it took to create a successful mobile game, but they wanted a breakthrough hit. And they wanted to reach a broader audience of non-gaming, fashion-loving women. So, using a disciplined experimental approach, early in the process, they yielded what is now an evergreen hit, 3 years running with thousands of paying subscribers. Happify is a digital service that's game-like but doesn't look like a game. The team knew firsthand from their own experience how effective science-based happiness exercises would be. That was their big idea. What they didn't know is, would people actually pay for a guided happiness service online? Was that a viable business? That's the thing they actually needed to find out. Those are the hard questions, and the earlier you address them, the better off you'll be at actually moving toward a mainstream hit. 2, laser focus on your early adopters. You want to delight a small, passionate group of early players or early adopters first. Picking the right ones is critical, and many people get this wrong. All the hits I've worked on got this right. Early adopters don't look like Segway riding rock stars. They're specific to what you're doing. To innovate successfully, you need to find and delight the people who will put up with cost, inconvenience, and ridicule to use your project, to use your game, because it solves their problem, it meets their need, it delights them. That's what an early adopter is. How many of you have heard of Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore? Okay, it's a really good basic business book. This opened people's eyes to the difficulty of marketing innovative products to a mass market, aka crossing the chasm. And he illustrated key differences between early adopters and the early majority. This difference actually came from a division in a theory from 3 decades earlier called the innovation diffusion theory. How many of you have ever heard of this? Okay, how many? Everett Rogers, remember that name. This theory is completely data-driven. It was a guy at AT&T Bell Labs. And this is a data-driven model of how new products spread through existing communities. The punchline is that the role of early adopters is critical for successful innovations. There's a lot of different ways you can leverage those early adopters. At eBay, Piero Midger actually got the idea for the reputation system of eBay from an early user during a customer support call. Will Wright, the genius behind The Sims, many of you know him, I worked closely with him on that and other projects. He actively cultivated relationships with a highly creative group of superfans who provided a rich source of ideas, feedback, and content long before the game ever shipped. That actually was one of the secret weapons of game development, is connecting with the right superfans. On Rock Band, we knew that social dynamics would make or break that risky game. So we focused on understanding the needs and habits, not of the core gamers we already knew about, but of a larger and more aspirational audience of casual gamers and music gamers and even non-gamers, which was key to understanding what they needed and helped Rock Band turn into the hit that it became. The third habit is to really learn about your customers' needs and, even more importantly, their existing habits. This can have a huge effect on customer uptake and adoption. Often we assume people will just adopt a new habit to use our game, to play our game, try our product. And sometimes that happens. It's much, much, much smarter and easier to drive uptake if you can understand their existing habits and build your core loop into those habits. So how do you learn about existing habits? You can do field interviews with early adopters. You can go to where they live, work, and play. You can even Skype with them and learn a lot by just looking at their environment that they're Skyping with you with. We did a ton of that in Rock Band. I've got a technique called speed interviews. I'm going to talk a little more about that later. Speed interviews are 5, maybe 10-minute interviews. You do them with 20 or 30 early adopters. And if you ask the right questions, you will see patterns faster than you ever will any other way. Happify used speed interviews to completely turn around their initial idea. They were imagining, they came from the gaming industry, and they were imagining like a tower defense game and a really cool game-like interface. Did all these speed interviews, laser focused on their core audience, early adopters, found those people wanted something that felt a lot more like Pinterest than a game. Building that was a huge shift in them actually gaining traction. They're now the leading service in the digital happiness niche, which it turns out, if you didn't know, is a fast-growing digital health niche and very financially successful. Habit 4 is about creating a culture of iterative testing. Everybody says this, okay? Who doesn't say that they do iterative testing? Every game designer worth their salt. Everybody who embraces lean startup. And in that sense, it's very much game design is lean design in my book. But how you do that, what you test, when you do it in your cycle, is what makes the magic happen. Successful innovators are tinkerers and experimenters. They test and refine many ideas. They don't get too hung up on any one idea, any one feature. And they're smart enough to include their customers, the right ones, in the feedback cycle really early, right from the start. Recently, I worked with a set of very experienced game designers at an educational gaming company. They know all this, but they are in an environment that set up every 3-month play tests. And they needed support, arguments, and a lot of sort of getting around the system in order to do lightweight weekly play tests. And it wasn't until they adopted that that they began to actually hit their goals. So make it a habit. Set up a weekly play test early. Let's say you haven't built anything. All the better. Interview people. Show people your competitors' products and watch them use it. There's a lot of different ways. But culturally, if you're a manager or a leader, one of the most effective ways to speed up development process is set up the discipline with the right strategy up front of lightweight weekly play tests and make sure you're testing it on the right people. That is probably the single most effective accelerant I've ever seen. And you will learn what's wrong really quickly. You also want to evolve your testers. For instance, on the Sims team, they were doing this right from the start. Barely workable software was being play tested by the team, then by the studio, then by the early adopter superfans, then et cetera, with concentric rings of people getting closer and closer to the actual target audience. So it changes over time. The 5th habit is a bonus habit. Not everybody does this, but I noticed when I look back on all the breakthrough hits I've worked on, every one of them did this, and they did it early. So I want to share it with you. It's to cultivate an early customer feedback community. This builds on the previous ideas. If you're in touch with your passionate early customers, you want to also give them an easy way to stay in touch, not just with you, but with each other. Could be a Facebook group, could be a mailing list, could be a Slack channel, could be a Slack subgroup in a larger channel, could be, totally doesn't matter what the tool is. It should be a tool they're comfortable with. If you do that, first of all, it'll be much easier to recruit. I'll talk about the early adopter funnel later. But you can listen in as they talk to each other. And that's one of the best ways to know what people really think about your product. So try it. Create a private group. Happify did this, and it really helped them shape their product. Plus, when they had internal arguments about, well, we have 2 interface directions, some people like this, some people like that, they can get the voice of the user in there just like that and add it. It's really speeded up UI iteration once we got to that point. Don't make the rookie mistake of lumping all your customers together once you grow. You want to if you have a nice early adopter community, don't just start shoving newbies in when you're scaling. Give them their private place, let them continue, and also join a larger community. This brings us to one of the most critical habits, testing and tuning the most important part of the customer experience first. So many people make this mistake because it's easier to work on other parts. So a core loop is a gaming concept, for those of you who don't know, that describes the interlocking activities, progress markers, and rewards a player experiences during a session. As Dan Cook says, skill building and learning are an essential part of what makes a core loop work. So people get confused about what is and isn't a core loop. You want to be careful you're not validating your marketing message when you're actually trying to work on your core loop. So a lot of people in lean startup land say, oh, a fake landing page is the right way to do an MVP. That has nothing to do with the core loop. That can actually lead you astray. But it will help you know if your marketing message is getting some resonance. A lot of people think an operant conditioning loop or a Skinner box loop is a core loop, and it's close. It's got some of the same parts. It's got feedback and rewards, but it is not a core loop because it has nothing to do with skill building, learning, and personal empowerment. And that's the thing that differentiates a compelling experience where someone is getting better at something over time from a Skinner box. Skill building is, if you take one thing away from this, I'd like you to take away the idea that orchestrating your design around making your customer more often, building up their skill, is one of the best ways to work quickly and build a compelling yet simple MVP. Because the process of learning and mastery in itself is deeply and intrinsically motivating. So to create a robust core loop, you want to combine compelling feedback with the skill building power of a game. You want to create engaging, repeatable activities triggered by some existing need. You want to build feedback that promotes learning and skill building that's very different than feedback in a Skinner box. And you want to close that loop by giving people compelling and meaningful reasons to return and the cues to remind them. Here's the Clash of Clans core loop. This has several different engaging activities interlocking, but it's got all those parts. It's not the only thing that makes Clash of Clans work, but they got that right before they moved on to fancier stuff. Same with Rock Band. We worked on the Rock Band core loop for 6 months before we added anything fancy, getting the feel right, just getting that play a song, get the right feedback, get some, go see a new venue, level up. Just those very, very basics. Even Twitter has a core loop because you actually have something you can get better at, and it gives you the feedback through the stats to get better at it. There's an engaging activity, simple though it is. And then there's feedback. Are people responding to and noticing my tweets? And there's triggers and a sense of investment. It's hard to walk away when you've built up your stats. We all know that as game designers. So the last one is the golden key to building long-term engagement. Teams who produce breakthrough innovations, whether they're building a game or whether they're building a product or app, they recognize the importance of early adopters. They empower them. They learn from them. They leverage their skills, and they give them a path to mastery. You can engage all your customers with progressive skill building. We've seen that. But you'll only engage your very best customers, your most passionate advocates, your enthusiasts, by giving them the tools, powers, and rewards of mastery. More than anything, what people really want is to have an impact. A really simple hack is just when you're testing early mock-ups and ideas, have an early adopter community and test those early mock-ups with them as well. It's good for them. They feel important, like they're having an impact. It keeps them motivated to give you feedback and test your broken game before it's ready. But it also gives you the voice of the user, which you can combine with everything else. And a lot of companies really struggle with this. You also want to build aspirational progression systems. In Rock Band, we had big internal arguments early about the progression. I mean, if you've played Rock Band, you know it's very over the top. You know, the whole thing is over the top. That's an aspirational progression system. That's not for the real musicians. That's for wannabe musicians, what they imagine being a rock star would be like. And that's really key toward building a path to mastery. You also want to surface and empower high-skill customers. If you're building skills with your customers and your game is building their skills, once they've built up those skills, you want to give them something interesting to do and give them a spotlight. So Ultima Online was the first MMO I ever worked on. And that's an early precursor to World of Warcraft, so use those of you who don't know. Ultima Online offered many different earned roles to loyal players to help police and manage the game world. It started off as CYA, cover your ass, because it grew really fast and we didn't have enough staff. But we actually all learned together that there's a role for expert players to help enable the game world and run it smoothly. League of Legends is following on this with their tribunal system. So there are 7 quick habits. Don't feel like you have to do all of these. If there's 1 or 2 of these that you could try out now today in what you're doing, I would encourage you to try it out. These together will let you innovate faster, smarter, and more effectively. And I have a link at the end with lots more details, so I'll go through these quick. But I really like to give people something actionable right away. So here's one. It's called the MVP Canvas. If you've ever heard of the business model canvas or the lean canvas, similar but completely focused on early product and game design. What I found is if you can really clarify your strategy and who your audience is, identify your strengths, your values, and your early success metrics, which are different than your later ones, that will help you then surface your key assumptions to test. I mentioned this earlier. Lean Startup has a lot of stuff about testing your assumptions. It's really hard to figure out what your assumptions are. And this tool actually is a planning tool for fast, smart low fidelity, high learning, early experiments, getting the most out of those. Little planning goes a long way. Second one is the early adopter funnel I alluded to earlier. However you do it in terms of details, what this means is identify who your early adopters are going to be, test that assumption, and then get a funnel going so that you don't have to scramble to recruit the right people for testing. This will have a dramatic impact on speeding up your design and moving you faster to product market fit. You want to start by finding and interviewing maybe 10 to 15 of them really quickly. Identify some patterns that are relevant, just a few revealing questions. That really helps you focus on patterns versus going deep. And you want to find these enthusiastic early customers who then, after several stages of being interviewed, really want to keep participating. They're going to be your alpha testers and your beta testers. You also get actionable design insights from those interviews that can really help you answer questions early in your cycle. And the third one is something called habit stories. How many people here have ever heard of jobs to be done or job stories? Okay, that is an awesome approach to design that's much more modern than personas and scenarios. Go look it up. Anyway, I won't go into detail, but here's the punchline. If you are doing customer research and you're trying to say, okay, we've done the research, we have to build our game. How do we turn that research into actionable insights? You can write job stories, and a habit story is a job story built around an existing habit with an unmet need. So what you want to do is scan through all that data and say, what are people's existing habits? And you ask questions around them. And do they have some unmet need in it? Maybe they play some game already. Maybe they watch TV. Like, what do they already do that you can hook into? What activity would what your thing is be replacing? Think about their existing habits. Think about how to make that habit better, how to hook into it. And then you want to piggyback your game, your core loop, onto that existing habit. And you can help yourself do that by writing a habit story. If you're interested, you can go look at the link for all the details about how to do it. And let me now tell you a quick story about Covet Fashion and how we did this to do the early design of what turned into a breakthrough hit. We used the MVP canvas to identify who they thought the early adopters were, what they were trying to do, how we'd measure it, what the team was good at, their unfair advantage. And then came up with our key assumptions, which are basically, will people really want to play and get excited about a mobile game that blends real-world fashion cycles into a game? Can we get non-gamers to play was the key question, because it wouldn't work if we couldn't. So we set up an early adopter funnel. We got young women. We did all phone screening interviews. We brought the best of those in to test our very earliest concepts. We tested our concepts when we were embarrassed by them. Okay, they were so early. But we got great feedback, even though it was hard to hear as designers. We did it all quickly in 3 or 4 weeks from the early sessions. We found 3 key activity patterns. One of them we called the fashion browser. This is a young woman who really enjoys flopping on the couch after work and just flipping through Vogue and would like a game that's kind of like flipping through Vogue. We wrote a habit story around that and then used that to drive game design. The co-creator is the person who always dresses with a buddy. Oh, my friend's across the country and we used to go to college together, and whenever I buy a new dress, I text her a picture of the dress. Should I get the blue or the pink? And I really wish she was nearby so she could accessorize me before I go on a date. That's the co-creator. Someone who with their mom or their sister or their friend, they just really like dressing together. Well, our job was to build a co-op game, and that's my specialty. So we wrote a job story around that had to do with rating your friend's closet, ended up building a shared closet into the game, which is one of the key features that led to its success. And we had that idea before we built anything. The armchair stylist is the third person. This is someone who wants to tell other people how to dress. Doesn't in real life, would like to do it here. So that person's story is really about providing, as they see it, a useful service. We then updated our canvas after all that research to reflect confirming our hypotheses, which they were largely confirmed. And we felt that based on what we found, the game could be a hit because we brought in a lot of non-gamers got their feedback, and they were really excited about it. So then the company green-lighted the next round of development, which was building alpha. We built alpha, built on that early adopter funnel, got the game out in 9 months. That was 3 years ago. It's still growing, and it's turned into a breakthrough hit. So if you want to know more, if you want to actually grab some templates and use them, you can go to gettingtoalpha.shortcuts. What I do is help teams, game teams and product teams, turbocharge the path to product market fit. If you want to talk to me about that, again, go to Getting to Alpha. Happy to have a introductory call with you and see if I can give you some insight into your product. If you want to stay in touch, the best thing to do is follow me on Twitter. You can send me an email. Go to my blog, amyjokim.com. And I really hope that something out of what you heard today changes your product and accelerates your path to product market fit. Thank you.